Justice delayed is justice denied. Well, say relatives of struggle heroes who were murdered by apartheid security police. The Supreme Court of Appeal yesterday dismissed apartheid policeman Jan Rodrigues' appeal, paving the way for his ultimate prosecution for the murder of struggle activist Ahmed Timol 47 years ago. Could this be the first of hundreds of cases the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommended be prosecuted, including those of Steve Biko, the Cradock Four, Aggett, Nokuthula Simelane, and many others? Well, family representatives of some of these heroes will be joining us shortly to tell us whether they think yesterday's SCA ruling on Jan Rodrigues gives them hope that finally the apartheid regime's killers will be brought to book. Yesterday's SCA ruling also came with some stern words for a very important institution in our country, the National Prosecuting Authority, the NPA. The man in charge of the NPA's Priority Crime Litigation Unit, Chris McAdam, is here to tell us whether anything has changed at his organization and whether to expect the perpetrators of to be charged anytime soon. The Watchdog starts now. Well, let's welcome to the program the NPA's Priority Crime Litigation Unit, Mr. Chris McAdam. Mr. McAdam, thank you very much for agreeing to come on the program this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Roya, and welcome to all the listeners and the other panelists.
Now, it's almost 2 years since Shamila Batoy, the National Director of Public Prosecutions, promised Parliament that you were going to prioritize the prosecution of apartheid crimes. What has happened since?
Voya, what happened is when the National Director was appointed, she immediately conducted an audit of where the NPA stood, how it was addressing cases, and on specifically the TRC cases, she established that these cases were being located in a special unit based in Pretoria, a very small team of advocates, and that unit was responsible not only for all the TRC cases committed throughout the country, but was also tasked with very serious cases relating to terrorism, violation of Security Council sanctions, mercenary activity, crimes against humanity being committed in foreign countries, etc. And under that model, only 4 TRC cases were actually being attended to because, first of all, the advocates were based in Pretoria, but the crimes were committed throughout the country. And every time they needed to attend to a case outside of Pretoria, this would involve traveling to the region. The prosecutors were Pretoria-based, so they're not familiar with the crime environment, the role players in the provinces. So what she said is that has to change. And she then decided that although there will be national oversight of the TRC cases, that is the Priority Crimes Unit, which is part of her head office establishment and reports to her management structure, the cases themselves would be dealt with by the directors of prosecutions where the crimes were committed. So immediately that made available a large pool of prosecutors in the regions themselves, an easy access to the courts, an easy access to where the evidence was located. So straight away, that enabled considerably more cases to receive attention. And then work was done further because we must stress that the NPA is not an investigative unit. The NPA for TRC cases depends on the Directorate Priority Crimes Litigation Unit of the Hawks, the DPCI. They are responsible for the conduct of the investigations, and the NPA's responsibility is to give guidance to those investigations so that the evidence is gathered in a manner in which it will be admissible in court. So we established that there was a similar challenge with the DPCI. The cases were located in a unit based in Pretoria, which was also tasked with the investigation of a number of other very serious crimes over and above the TRC cases. So that initiated a negotiation process with the Hawks, which was dealt with very amicably, resulting in the Hawks also deciding to, in certain cases, regionalize investigations. One would always have to have a head office component for a TRC investigation, because much of your material is located in state archives that are based in Pretoria. So having people in Pretoria would then dispense with the need for investigators to travel from provinces. Now, the upshot of that was that within a year, 53 cases were then receiving the attention of both investigators and prosecutors. The process would be, once a case is referred to the DPCI for investigation, at the same time as an investigator is appointed, then a prosecutor is appointed. So the two of them work together on the case from the very beginning. And progress was made. Now, we must stress, these are very old cases. There have been unique challenges with these cases, which we sincerely regret. But at this moment in time, we can't turn back the clock. We can merely try and make amends since 2019 for what should have taken place from 2003 to 27, but unfortunately did not. Okay. And that led to... Sorry.
Are we going to get into some of the issues you are raising, including the problems you may encounter as you go along? But one, for the purposes of tonight's discussion, I want us to talk specifically about the cases like the TRC cases, the cases that the TRC referred to the government, over 300, I understand. No, so from 4, when Shamila Batoy arrived, you now have 53, you say. Now, of those 53, can you remember some of them off the top of your head? Who they involve and so on?
Yes, I can. I know all of those cases off by heart because I every month have to report on progress on them. I'm just cautious of dealing with a number of specific cases because they are under investigation. In certain cases, the potential suspects are unaware of the investigations. We don't want to alert them to the fact that they are being investigated because this could result in the investigation being interfered with. In other cases, victims have taken us into their confidence, and I'd be reluctant to publicly discuss their cases without them knowing that I actually am on television. It would be hurtful to them to say they're only here on TV. There is a public debate on the matter. But if we look at the high-profile cases that have commanded not only the South African interest, but the international community, I can assure you that that list of 53 does include some of the most prominent cases that the TRC dealt with.
Okay. Now, according to affidavits that were filed some years ago by the then, or the former National Director of Public Prosecutions, Vusi Pikoli, as well by Anton Ackerman, who occupied the position you are occupying now, albeit in an acting capacity. Cabinet ministers blocked the prosecutions. Former Justice Minister Bridget Mabandla, former Intelligence Minister Ronnie Kasrils, and the late Police Commissioner Jackie Silebi among the names that were cited, with Ackerman going further to say he believed that the National Director of Public Prosecutions was instructed at a political level to suspend these cases. How much are you any wiser today as to what exactly happened there? Because as police, as people rather, who are charged with taking this process forward, correcting the wrongs of the past, it makes sense to understand what actually happened, what blocked these cases from being dealt with.
Yes, for you. As part of my appointment, because I was appointed by the National Director as part of the process of prioritizing cases. So I did a lot of research into documentation which existed at that time. I also filed an application in the Rodrigues matter, where my affidavit was confirmed by Vusi Pakoli, the previous National Director, and attached to that affidavit were numerous documents which tell a specific story. Now,
what
in
story
the
are they
Rodrigues
telling?
matter, it was first.
What story are they telling?
They do document an interference with the NPA process, but in regard to that matter, the court which first ruled on the Rodrigues judgment, that was the full bench of the Gauteng division, they placed an order on the National Director that she should investigate this matter further with the aim of establishing whether there was an interference with the mandate of the NPA, which would constitute an offence under the NPA Act. It's a crime to obstruct a prosecutor in the execution of his or her duties. Now, with the Supreme Court of Appeals now confirming the judgment of the High Court, the National Director is giving urgent attention to conducting that investigation. So I believe it would be improper for me to deal with the merits of this matter, because that is the subject of an investigation which the National Director is engaged with.
Okay. Has that investigation begun, or is it about to begin, or will it begin at some point in the future?
What happened is, as soon as that High Court judgment was handed down, the National Director had a meeting with her senior management, and immediately a number of courses of action were considered, and we started exploring which would be the most transparent and objective manner to conduct that investigation. Now, what happened is the accused in the Rodrigues case then brought an application for leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeals, which meant that now the Supreme Court of Appeals was at liberty to now look into that order of the High Court and may have considered that the duty placed on the National Director is inappropriate. The issue should be dealt with in a completely different manner. So the formal investigation did not commence, but on an ongoing basis, the National Director gave attention to the matter, and I've been informed now that the judgment is handed down, there will be immediate steps. So certainly this matter is not going to be shelved or ignored. It was simply that it was deemed prudent to wait for the judgment of the appeal court, because it had the power to say that the duty placed on the National Director was inappropriate. Some other course of action should have been taken.
Now, Mr. McAdam, I'm sure you will have seen yesterday's SCA ruling, reminding us all that the Constitution vests exclusive power to the NPA to institute criminal proceedings on behalf of the state, and requires the NPA to exercise its functions without fear, favor, or prejudice. Now, how much resolve is there among the leadership of the NPA to never again be interfered with or dictated to, as was apparently the case, certainly on account of a former Director of Public Prosecutions, Vusi Pakoli?
When the National Director was interviewed for the post of National Director, she indicated she would only be prepared to accept that appointment if she received a guarantee from the President that there would be no interference in the mandate of the NPA. And most certainly, in the period where she has held office, I can honestly say that I have not experienced any political interference. But if we look further at the judgment in the Rodrigues case, it also requires that there be guarantees given to ensure that what happened in the past will never happen again. And again, this will be part of the investigation conducted by the National Director. It's not only to answer the question, was there interference or not, but I must say what mechanisms are now in place to prevent a repeat of what happened. And this will be a transparent process. I mean, the national director at the appropriate stage will have to go public on what the outcome of that investigation is. And also, as we've seen with, for example, the Commission of Inquiry into the arms deal, any interested party who is unhappy with the course of action taken by the national director would be entitled to approach the High Court and have it reviewed on the basis of the rule of law, which is enshrined in the Constitution. So I certainly believe, and I honestly hope, that we will not see a repeat of this again.
Now, I mean, we live in a country where, I mean, conspiracy theories are still abound with everything that's going on now, whether we're talking about vaccines or state capture, inquiry. People, you know, say all manner of things. But what is there to a doubting Thomas who may be sitting at home, or me standing in front of you now? What is there to show that indeed you've taken your independence very seriously, and nothing like what allegedly happened before will ever happen again? What is there, what can you point to say, if you look at how we dealt with this, that, and the other thing, you will see that we are a changed NPA?
Well, Vuya, the first thing we must appreciate on the TRC cases, they're not current crimes where, you know, the crimes reported today, within 2 days, the police can arrest and a suspect will be in court, and very quickly in the High Court where there'll be a trial. A lot of work has to go into these matters to building them. But I am sure that if contact is had with the various persons who've approached the DPCI or the NPA to ask us to look into these 53 cases, they will confirm that they are receiving updates from the investigators who are dealing with those investigations. Where appropriate, the prosecutors also have meetings with the families and their lawyers. But the 53 cases is only part of the news. The country went into a severe lockdown in 2020. Now, what happened is that did slow down investigations, where one has to travel throughout the country looking for witnesses. A lot of the archives where evidence was stored were closed for serious periods. Investigators also lost their lives from COVID, driving and contracting COVID while traveling and succumbing to the disease. But in that same period, an audit was done of each and every death and detention. The earliest case was 1963. The most recent reported case was 1990. And those remaining cases, which were not under investigation, were earmarked for investigation. In addition, because of the public statements made by the national director, members of the public started taking the NPA into its confidence, writing to us, asking us to look into their cases. So now we have identified currently, and our numbers are increasing on an ongoing basis. We're looking at 65 other cases that are going to be investigated. What we've done, because now we are close to 120 cases, the DPCI already on the 1st of April this year hired 34 retired detectives whose mandate is to work exclusively on TRC cases. So they're not having to try and do a TRC case in amongst terrorism and other very serious crimes that there is a high public interest in. They started work on the 1st of April. The NPA is matching them by getting approval to appoint retired senior members of the NPA who will also exclusively on a contract basis work full-time on these matters. And that will give us even greater capacity to look into these cases. At the end of the day, I don't think we can judge progress on what I say tonight. We need to just look at what is being accomplished with these cases and what results they produce. But there's definitely a commitment from both the NPA and from the DPCI to really give attention to these matters. I think that in the last 2 years, more has been done on TRC cases than since the start of the TRC. Before the TRC, there was the De Oliveira unit, which did exceptional work in the prosecution of Eugene de Kock, Wouter Besson, the Motherwell bombing, and other high-profile cases. And we are trying now to put as much resources as the state can permit to try and belatedly, and regrettably belatedly, do justice to these cases.
Couple of quick ones before I let you go. One is that, I mean, if you look at the Timol case, you know, we're talking 47 years there. So a lot of time has actually lapsed. And with inquests, of course, I mean, findings are made on the balance of probabilities, whereas in a criminal court, you have to prove your case beyond reasonable doubt. How easy or difficult do you think, having looked at the 53 cases, how easy or difficult do you think your task is going to be?
Well, yeah, there are certain challenges with these cases. If you read the judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeals carefully, they highlight those issues. But the NPA is committed to gathering as much evidence as possible on each case that we ask to look into. When we get a request, we don't do an assessment to say it's a strong, winnable case, yes, we'll take it. No, it's a hopeless case, sorry, we can't help you. We take these cases on with the absolute minimal evidence available. And what we do is try and gather as much evidence as is humanely possible. If we want to prosecute, we must prove our case beyond reasonable doubt. And obviously, we must make sure that when we do institute a prosecution, there are reasonable prospects of success. But if we can't have a prosecution, but an inquest court previously ruled that the person committed suicide or that the police were not responsible for his or her death, but we now have evidence that shows that that is different. We committed to opening those inquests so that the families of the victims can, in open court, see that the court record has been put correct. So we would have a judgment by a new court which makes the true finding as to how that person died. If the evidence is of such a weak nature that we cannot even have a reopened inquest, at least we would then go to the family and say, here's a full report of each and every step that we took in the investigation. This is why we can't take it further. And, you know, we sincerely hope that people will say that those were sincere efforts. We didn't take shortcuts, failed to follow up key evidence. An important aspect to emphasize is we also have a missing persons task team, which also falls under my section, and that is committed to tracing the remains of people who disappeared in the TRC period. They've already successfully exhumed over 100, persons that were simply missing. Now they've found the bodies. The families have been able to rebury them in a dignified ceremony, and they are actively involved in assisting us with these cases because through their work, they also pick up leads which are relevant to the investigation. So they are also working very closely with the MPA and the DPCI. And through their work, we've actually identified some new cases that we are investigating.
Last question. Families, as you know, have actually made several representations to the president and members of his executive, asking for the state, in its broader sense, to look into this matter. One, how much political will is there this time around? And are you getting the backing by way of resources to actually complete this task?
Well, I can't answer for, the politicians, but what I can tell you is that resources are being made available. The DPCI have, taken 34 former detectives and reinstated them on contract. The MPA is busy with the same process. We've also had funds available to us where we need to appoint private forensic experts because the people that did the original reports are dead or there's a question mark concerning those original assessments. That funding's been made available, and the TRC cases are priority crimes, so they are directly monitored through by the National Director, through her head office leadership, although we are using the DPPs where the crimes were committed to actually manage the cases themselves.
Chris McAdam, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, Chris McAdam is, of course, the NPA's Priority Crime Litigation Unit head, full of hope and telling us of, better and more interesting things that are going to happen. But do the families and the groups that are responsible for taking this process against odds to be where it is now agree? That's what we're going to examine next. We'll be joined by family members of some of our murdered struggle heroes, as well as organizations that have been backing them throughout this struggle. Don't go away. We'll be back. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog, and tonight we're looking at whether there's a will to actually prosecute people who are responsible for apartheid crimes. And to take you back, the Truth Commission and Reconciliation Commission did give the state hundreds of names of cases to look into and investigate and see whether the prosecution, it was the natural thing to do. But over the years, as you have heard, this process has delayed and delayed, frustrated families that wanted closure, but that also wanted the truth about what actually happened to their family members. There have also been numerous organizations that have supported these families to make sure that they get what they deserve. Well, I am joined by three such people. Nokuthula Simelane is the son of Steve Biko. Dorothy Kalata is the daughter of Fort Kalata. Yasmin Suka is a former commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Welcome to all three of you. Thank you very much for coming through this evening. I'm going to start with you, Yasmin. Having listened to what Chris McAdam just said, has your hope been renewed?
Thank you very much for inviting me. I have to say that I've been here before. And, the Foundation for Human Rights, where I was the executive director after I finished with the Truth Commission, has been pursuing these cases since 2003, including trying to get a proper prosecution policy from the NPA. In October 2019, when the new head of the NPA was appointed, I think all of us had renewed hope, but I can only say that in the period since then, and I heard Chris referring to cases being given to DPPs, I can tell you that it's been like a football game where, because of their decentralization policy and the absence of a dedicated unit to deal with these cases have been kicked from pillar to post, and what we have is a vacuum where nobody actually takes responsibility for making any kind of decision on the case. So I will only be happy when I actually see a special dedicated unit that only deals with the TRC cases and which is prosecutor investigation led. And it should be under the helm of a special director who can take decisions, because right now, we are waiting for decisions on cases, and the local DPP will tell you, well, I've referred it to Pretoria. In Pretoria, they will tell you, I've referred it to the local DPP. And so at the end of the day, nobody is accountable. And what we're really looking for is a central focus for accountability on these cases.
Dorothy, do you feel the same way? Dorothy, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you now, Vuyo. Can you come again, please?
Do you feel the same way Yasmin feels?
Yes, Vuyo, these cases have been coming on for a very, very long time. Interesting enough, about a week and a half ago, we had a visit here at home from members who claimed that they were from the Hawks and that they've been assigned these cases. And they just quickly came in just to come and introduce themselves. Look, to be honest with you, I wasn't impressed. And not that I do not trust the individuals, I hardly know them, but it did feel as if this is just another delay tactic. We know what happens, like with regards to police cases, and we know what happens, within the Eastern Cape. Because I remember asking them clearly if they thought that it was a good thing for them to actually be handling the Cradock Four case. They said yes, because things happened here. With the history of archives and everything else that we know is happening in our country, we are not hopeful. Let me just put it like that. It will take a lot of effort in terms of convincing us. It will take a lot of doing for us to start believing that something is really being done with regards to the cases. It cannot be all talk and not do anymore. We actually want to witness something being done.
Nkosinathi, you've said previously that the reason no one has been prosecuted for your father's death and those of many others had a lot to do with the lack of political will. And I guess the SCA judgment yesterday does reaffirm your view. But having listened to Chris McAdam a short while ago, has your stance changed?
No. It will take a lot.
Sorry, it was Nkosinathi. Sorry, Dorothy. I was asking Nkosinathi. Apologies.
Sorry.
Okay. Nkosinathi?
Yes, the statement I made a few moons back was that there was a lack of political will. What the SCA judgment confirms, and I think the judgment before it also confirms, is that it was more than a case of a lack of political will. It talks about political interference. And that is a serious matter. And so to go back to the question that you asked my fellow panelists, we cannot be excited yet about the NPA. This is the beginning of what is a long road for the NPA to extract itself out of embeddedness in the political agendas of the ruling elite and find its wings based on the Constitution, as is confirmed by the judgment of the SCA. So this is the beginning. And certainly it is a part of our efforts to ensure that it awakens to its responsibility. What we are excited about, Vuyo, I can tell you for sure, is that the SCA judgment is one more layer, and combined with the judgment by Mushidi, Kolapen, and others in the court before it, and Judge Montle, we now have a serious cohort of cases to provide us with guidance about what needs to happen with the likes of Rodrigues. We were not here in 2017. There was a lot of ambiguity. And I think we now have case law that provides a very firm foundation for us in the way forward.
In fact, what you've just said reminds me of something that was said in 2019, even before yesterday's judgment. South Gauteng High Court issuing a scathing judgment in which it said, and I quote, "The NPA cannot, as it seeks to do, portray itself purely as a victim of political machinations of the time." And that's exactly what you're saying, isn't it?
Indeed. What we require and what we need inside the NPA is the kind of officer that is as brave as the likes of Vusi Pikoli, people who understand that they will fight for their rights as provided by the Constitution. You heard Chris earlier talking about the issue of interference and that it is in fact prohibited in terms of the South African Constitution. So we require a recharged officer within the NPA to take that office and utilize fully the powers that are embedded in that office.
Yasmin, you said when you started that we've been here before. Is there nothing over the past 2 years that has, is there anything, I should say, that has changed your mind or that has given you something that says, well, maybe they are trying. We can see here and there that they're trying to assert their authority and independence. They are resisting political interference. Or are you not convinced at all that anything has changed? Yasmin?
I was incredibly hopeful for you in October 2019. When we had our workshop with the NPA and her full cohort of prosecutors, and we brought along our legal team as well. And I think that all of us left that workshop believing that there would be progress on all these matters. We disagreed, I think, intrinsically with the NDPP's view that she was going to decentralize, because remember that the Priority Crimes Litigation Unit was actually created to provide a central authority to deal with cases which were priority crimes. And under Bulelani Nuka, the TRC cases were designated as priority crimes. So in the last 2 years, we, the families and the legal team, have engaged consistently with the NPA and different prosecutors. We've brought our investigators to meetings. We've provided them with records. We've reconstructed dockets for them. And in fact, last year, our team had an engagement with them around the Cradock Four, actually setting out who the available witnesses were and what leads they needed to follow. And at that point, they told us that they would come back in May with a decision. And we are now in June. And we have no decision on the Cradock Four. And what I fear is that we are in this battle against time, because one of the key witnesses, Eric Winter, is also dying in a clinic from cancer. Lukanya himself will point out that when FW de Klerk Foundation announced that he had cancer, there was a deep fear that we would never actually see him in a court of law. And so that is why I think that this picture of hopefulness that Chris points out is one which I want to see only, when I see it in effect. And as I've said, we have 3 demands: a special director, a dedicated team made up from the Hawks and the NPA, and they must only deal with the TRC cases. They cannot be sidetracked with other work. And then, of course, the state has to provide the resources for it. There is one more issue that we raised, which is why we want this commission of inquiry. We need to know who in the NPA is compromised by having been part of the refusal to do their job, as the Supreme Court of Appeal set out so eloquently, that the NPA has to act in terms of the Constitution without fear or favor, and they have to do it in an independent way. I think we haven't seen that day yet, but we all live in hope that it will happen.
I guess you could extend that to also, former members of the executive who allegedly blocked the investigation, as per former Director of Public Prosecutions, Steve Biko's affidavit. Now, Dorothy, we're having this conversation days before we again remember the Cradock Four, which something that's going to be happening this weekend. But what for you would prove to everyone that this current leadership of the NPA is taking a more determined stance than those who came before it?
You know, it's interesting that you asked me that because yesterday I was speaking to Mrs. Nombuselo Mhlauli, and last week I actually had an interview with Mrs. Konto. And I know you're asking me the question, but I'm also going to answer with regards to what they have also sort of voiced. And that, for me, is when finally there can be hearings and the truth can come and be told. That, for me, would be the response, you know. Anything else, problems, hiccups, is not enough. For us as the families, I mean, it has been 36 years now of waiting and waiting and waiting. So it's no longer important to say who must do what. What we want to see being done is that there needs to be accountability. There needs to finally be justice. And justice to us is in knowing what happened. How it comes about is way overdue. Being hopeful is way overdue. You know, it's way, way, way overdue. It's almost as if we cannot hear anymore what the appeals of lack of staff, lack of resources, those things have been excuses for such a long time. The only thing that we want now as the families are answers. That is all. And I'm very, very much aware that the people who can be able to answer are really dying. And strange enough, most of them are dying of cancer, you know, which is something that tells me that there is a violence that is also eating them up. But they are protected one way or the other, and that is why they can stay in the dark and not come out. I mean, so far, as the families, we're feeling that the system has been protecting them. If there can be less talk and more action, that is all that we really, really want.
Speaking of protection, and that is really the point you are making, Yasmin, in a piece you wrote, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, isn't it? That these people are having fun, enjoying the protection, while the families and victims, you know, haven't found closure. They don't know the truth.
Yeah. I mean, you know, when you look at the constitutional compromise, and Nkosinati is on the core. At the time when the Truth Commission was established, there were many families who felt aggrieved by the fact that the state had basically taken away their rights to an investigation and a prosecution. Because when you look at serious international crimes, they have to be investigated and prosecuted by the state. There's an international and domestic obligation to do so. And so the families went to the Constitutional Court to actually review whether or not the TRC legislation satisfied their constitutional commitments. And the only basis on which it passed was the fact that there would be this TRC, the amnesty process would be by way of a conditional amnesty. And of course, the famous issue that if you did not apply or you were refused amnesty, then the law would take its course. It's interesting that in the SCA judgment, the court makes it very clear that in not applying for amnesty, Rodrigues actually took a huge risk. And that risk was that he would be prosecuted. And that is a very important finding by the Supreme Court appeals, because what that means is that no other perpetrator of apartheid crimes can come forward and say, well, there was this deal. In fact, the court goes on to say that such a deal would have been unconstitutional. The court actually also says that they find it absolutely perplexing that after the TRC did its work, stated that there was a need for a bold prosecution policy, handed over this list, that in fact there was this kind of political interference. And they reiterate the finding of the full bench that in fact this political interference must be investigated. The questions we confront on a daily basis from families of victims, this is our state that we fought for. This is the state for which our fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters gave up their lives. In this period of democratic freedom, is it fair that the democratic state betrays them? And I think that's the question that I was trying to raise in the article, how our hopes have been shattered because what we believed was that the rule of law would follow its course, and that hasn't happened. Every inch that we have gained from 2016 onwards has been bitterly fought for by the families of victims. And they are not being funded by the state, by the way. The state is funding the costs of perpetrators. But the families of victims, we have to find funding to support this litigation. I think you would agree that it's shameful and really ubiquitous. It's absolutely outrageous.
Nkosinathi, do you think we, perhaps with the benefit of hindsight, trusted too much? We trusted the people we shared a common history with to actually do the right thing, but alas.
Indeed. And that is why we, even as early as the TRC process, went to court to ensure that there was a balance between the rights of those who are victims and all of the other rights that we are extending as part of reconciliation. I mean, some of the ironies here, in fact, are so stark, right, that a fellow like Rodrigues relies on the democratic constitution to try and avoid accountability. This is the very constitution he fought tooth and nail to ensure never, ever sees the light of day. And this is a constitution for which Timol died. And he relies on that to try and assert his rights. And as my colleagues are saying now, as we gather in our homes this evening, all families, including our own group, which is the group we have formed to ensure that we can move from an emphasis on an individual case or individual cases to highlighting this cohort of cases, the apartheid victims family group. All of them are contributing to the coffers that are paying for Rodrigues' defense. Rodrigues has been dancing the jitterbug in our courts, trying to avoid accountability. I believe he's been in there 18 times. And finally, we are now looking forward to the moment, because there's no more days when he can appear for the 19th time and account for the murder of Timol. Yes, we trusted too much. Yes, we were betrayed. In fact, we have written to the president, because the appetite of institutions like the NPA flows from the appetite of the state. The appetite of the state also flows from the appetite of the dominant party, which is the African National Congress. So this is, in fact, also a trial of that. Now, one would wish for the party to look very carefully at what this means, because it is tasked with leading transformation. We are dealing now with Section 25, which deals with the land question. If we can't get the life question sorted out, how can we have faith in the party to lead us proficiently on the land question? And that's what should be the debate in all of these branches that are busy talking about cutting and slicing the cake.
And that's the point your family has been making, you and your brother Dorothy, isn't it? That it cuts even deeper when you are betrayed by a party, you know, that generations of your family has actually you know, been a very active part of.
Yes, it cuts very deep. Today is actually the birthday of my great-grandfather, who would have been 126 today. And as you know, he is one of the longest serving Secretary Generals of the ANC. And sometimes we would feel if you are not prepared to do this for Matthew Goniwe, for Tkalata, Sparom Konto, Scelom Shauli, and you are not prepared to do it for Mqenge, you are not prepared to do it for Biko, you are not prepared to do it, you know, for the other families. We are so many. At least do it then, you know, for James Tkalata, who literally served you, because maybe sometimes we would sit in our family and think that maybe, you know, these guys, because they haven't really witnessed the Cradock Four's work, because many of them were maybe in exile, which we know that even that is just an excuse. We know they've been communicating. We know they are aware of the work. We know that they know the contribution that was made by these comrades who were fighting internally whilst they were outside of the country. We know, you know, that these things are known. So it does cut very, very deep. And it requires us now to be brave and even stop denying that. You know, I'm thinking in particular of a recent interview where someone was asking me about a national apology. We have a tendency of going back to the apartheid era, but it's been 27 years and the ANC has been in power, and the ANC is our government, you know? So the betrayal cuts very, very deep, because we have a tendency of not wanting to point finger at the ANC as the governing party. And it is the party that our fathers have died for, not only fought for, they died for. Okay. So therefore, it does cut deep, and we should not be betrayed like this. And it is now about time to actually stand back and stand against the ANC and say, what have you been doing? Okay. I think we've tolerated them for such a long time, honestly. And now it's time to say, we're stopping the shenanigans. They must now be answerable. Okay.
And that's where we're going to leave this evening. Thank you very much, Yasmin Suka, Dorothy Tkalata, and Nkosinathi Biko. Well, that's where we're going to leave things this evening. What do you think? Do write to us on our social media platforms. Till we meet again tomorrow. Have a good night.